my name is Eddie Borup, and I've been doing some type of delivery for most of my career. And where I'd like to start is as an apprentice, 4 years in telecommunications, first 20 odd years. And on reflection, that was me in quite a few project teams, starting right at the sharp end of delivery. And then moving on in my career, at some point being a tech support engineer, you're doing new product development projects and leading technical projects, eventually becoming head of technical projects and head of a management capability of delivery. And fluctuating in my career from being a manager of a department and then picking up a large project and then going back into management, picking up a program, and then going back into management. And at some point of that career, I wound up being a manager of a PMO, so more of a portfolio management office, as we would call it now. And that started me, I suppose, in my profession of focusing more on the P word. So the career then started to go down the route of head of special projects, and then head of government projects, and then head of project management. So those last few years in sort of corporate life, although as a manager and as a senior manager, it was all about delivery. I then left my first career in telecoms after 21 years and set up my own consultancy to actually do contract project management. But I never got a chance to do it because when I was head of projects, I implemented Prince 2 as an early adopter, and I kept getting phone calls from organizations to help them implement Prince 2. And then after quite a few years of being only one of few accredited organizations to help implement these standards, I sold the business. And then after a year of transitioning, I went to work for my largest client, which was the United Nations, and then worked in multiple roles, some helping to improve capacity in country offices or with governments locally, and then finally picked up some field appointments, and the last one was head of programs in South Sudan during the first 18 months of the conflict, and then decided to come home and pick up really in the UK where I left off, doing the odd interim role, also doing a little bit of consultancy, but more importantly I then decided to go and do my Masters, and just graduated this year, and start to consolidate where I am. And in between all that, at some point I did 10 years in the Territorial Army, again joining as a soldier, but wind up going to Sandhurst and becoming an officer. So quite a variety of roles, leadership roles, management roles, delivery roles. I've always struggled with the concept of having lots of different methodologies and lots of integration. I mean, I can use anything. I mean, my background, I've used Prince, MSP, MOP, Agile. They're all good, they're all bad. But the issue is that up until Praxis, if you in a normal organization that maybe starts trying to implement projects and tries to do that well, at some point you will decide that it's important to now do programs, and at some point you'll realize it's a portfolio, and every time you're having to relook at something else. So for instance, you might have started life doing projects using perhaps Agile and perhaps Prince 2 or other methods, and then you start to understand, well, really this is a program. You might go out and start looking at managing successful programs, training people in that, and then you realize that the totality of what you're doing is a portfolio, so you start retraining people in portfolio management, and then you start looking at PMO qualifications, and they're all quite good, but as an organization you're having to figure out how it works yourself, how to integrate. So Praxis solves one of those issues for me, which is it's not overly fussed about what P word we use, because it's trying to have sort of an inbuilt integration, one-stop shop. So really, on reflection, had I had this as an option in those early days, it would have made it much easier to make that transition as we mature in an organization, to go from, now I understand projects and I realize I should be doing programs. I'm not having to relearn everything. I'm starting to sort of have that evolution built into to the standards that I'm looking at. So for me, it was that flexibility to drop the P word straight away. And we can just look at delivery and then look at praxis to sort of figure out how we use it in order to do the best delivery for that particular assignment. For me, because of what I'm doing, most of the time it's supporting others in either the development of the projects, development of the programs, or health checking. So again, now sort of making the connection between the world of academia and practical, there's a huge amount of evidence that says the moment an organization says to someone, here's a project, and then we start our methodology, we're nearly doomed to fail because you've labeled it. It's a project, so you're going to now use project management. And equally, if you say, and I want you to use Agile, I want you to use Prince2, saying those right at the beginning may kill the delivery because you've preempted how to do something in a way before you know fully what it is. So what I enjoy about Praxis is I feel I have the freedom to figure out, why we're doing something, root cause analysis of the why, and not have to label it, not have to say it's a project. I can even get as far as developing the plan, in draft form in order to understand the complexity, and then decide based on the maturity of the organization, the person leading it, the complexity, what is the best fit. And again, not having to label it, because I can pick and choose elements. So it could be that it's best to start this as a program because maybe that's the most appropriate form of governance and buy-in. But maybe you're able to move it from program to project. Maybe it also has some work packages. In other words, you're creating a delivery capability. And yes, there are still the P words within it, but it's that flexibility to say, well, okay, let's figure out what it is and why we're doing it. And once we understand the why and how we're going to do it, we can then figure out the best way to manage it and govern it and so on. So we're a little bit more freedom as opposed to, as I say, once someone says use Agile, you're up against having to force it in. It's same with print, same with anything else. Once you say you have to use a particular style, maybe that style isn't the right thing for this particular delivery or with this particular team in this particular organization. Flexibility, I suppose, is the key. Don't have many regrets in my life and career, but there are some things I do reflect. What would I have done differently? And that's where I'd like to take you. That when I was head of projects first time in my first career, what choices did I have out there in terms of how do I do projects? And my largest client, the government, were insisting we used Prince2 as it had just been released. But the issue I had was, yes, I had to figure out how to use that because you don't use it out of the book, you have to tailor it. Once you realize that you have programs, you have to start to retrain people in MSP and figure out how program management will work with project management. And MSP was just coming out when I left telecoms as a career. So that reflective bit would have been, had I had access to something like Praxis at the time and introduced that transition as we matured into understanding, actually we now realize we're doing programs. That transition would have been easier and more effective because you're not having to train people in a different methodology. You're not having to then rewrite your processes to figure out how they work because you're being trained in something that has all those 3 P words built into a portfolio, program and project. And certainly my experience subsequently in terms of the work I've done around the world and is most organizations do start delivering projects and they discover that they need to do that better. They go down the route of some sort of methodology normally. And you sit there and you talk with the head of projects or the director that's brought you in, and you try to explain to them that, you know, there will come a point when you realize that you are doing programs, and there'll come a point when you realize it's a portfolio. And Praxis then gives them that flexibility to stay where they are in terms of capability. But as the organization matures, the methodology can mature with them without having that substantial reinvestment in training. But to be fair, it doesn't mean that you wouldn't train in other things, but you wouldn't be doing it because you have to. You'd be doing it as part of career development. You know, to have one person in the project management department who is your expert at program management, and therefore they go off and do other qualifications, would then be reasonable. In essence, what a savvy head of projects, head of delivery can do as a decision is decide, well, you know, I can just train people in Praxis, and then as we develop, I'm still within that one framework to figure out how to do things. And if I want to know a lot more about my professional development, I can then do other training things that will help me professionally, as opposed to having to do it in order to then use it and integrate it and so on. The first one I did was when it first came out, exciting in our sad world, of being able to do the practitioner qualification without having to go through the sort of foundation. In other words, it was the first time it acknowledged that you already know stuff. So it's not treating you as, well, don't, ooh, whatever you've learned in the past, forget, we have to teach you from the beginning. So I quite like that, this ability to acknowledge what you've done before. And then, of course, in more recent times, the Praxis Framework Professional. I quite like that sort of connection with the Praxis Framework Professional, that it's not an exam, it's not testing you on something you've read in a book. It is enabling you to do a reflective journey of what you are doing, what you have done, compare that against competencies, in order to then be assessed by a peer. So again, a fair but a challenging interview presentation, which at the end of it, I genuinely felt that I had the ability to truly reflect some of my capability and be acknowledged for that capability. I like reflective learning. The chartered process in the end was quite straightforward, because I went route two, having done the Praxis Framework Professional and going through that sort of reflective period of learning. It seemed to me that the next step would be to sort of consolidate that within the profession itself, then leading to the chartered, which I found again refreshingly straightforward. A 30-minute interview, really making sure that it's me, this currency, I understand the ethics, and that I'm committed to professional development. So I found that really straightforward and refreshing. Like a lot of people, I use the phrase the imposter syndrome. I've done quite a few exciting things during my career, but always wondered if someone would find out I'm just an ex-apprentice. So, part of chartered, part of the masters, part of doing the Praxis Framework Professional is about consolidating my career and understanding and giving me even more confidence that some of the things I've been thinking about during my career, I'm not alone. So and also I'm at that point in my career also where I do want to try to give back more. So doing more mentoring and coaching. And again, it's important for me that when people are entering into mentoring, that the part of their selection is that I've achieved levels that they can relate to. Yes, I've worked closely in the past with Training Bite Size and know quite a bit about their background and their approach. So again, early on in the framework's life cycle, I joined a small cohort to work through the Praxis Framework Professional. And that was really good flexibility, that ability to work in a, if you like, a self-running cohort, sharing how we did it and sort of supporting each other. As opposed to, what I felt is if I went down the route 3, it would have felt like just filling in an application form and sort of sucking the life out of you in doing so. Whereas I know it still looks like an application form, but by doing it as a reflective learning process and guided, you're getting much more out of it. As opposed to, filling in something in order to get an interview, in order to get a qualification. It felt, a more rounded journey.